Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another webinar from A Place in the Sun. My name is Andy Bridge, and we're here to talk about money in the context of buying a property in Spain. So today we won't be focusing on how far your money will go, as in what does a two-bed apartment in Cabaroid cost. You can search aplaceinthesun.com for different properties and get a sense of your budget and what you would need to spend in different locations. Today we're talking about establishing a budget and then managing that budget. And actually that first point, establishing your budget, is such an important thing to do. It's a big world out there, and you need to narrow it down as to where you might ultimately end up buying a property. And what you can buy in a certain location will start to hone in on what is within your budget and what you can achieve. You also need to look at, are you going to splash the cash and pay up in full, or are you going to mortgage the property? And then once you've established a budget, how do you actually manage that budget with such things as currency transfer, and also have a good sense of other items that can impact your budget? So what is the equivalent of stamp duty in different countries? What are legal fees that are involved? All these sorts of considerations. So we found that these sessions work best with audience interaction. You should see a question mark on your screen. Feel free to click that at any point and ask us a question. We'll try and fit in as many questions as we can. We've got a good few coming in already, so thank you Anne-Marie Murray, Graham Harbord, Wilma Partridge for your questions to date, and we look forward to getting more through from the rest of you. We'll also be launching a couple of polls just to understand our audience's requirements and get some feedback directly from you. And to help me with all of this, I have got three panelists who are certainly capable of introducing themselves. So let me just hand over and they can all do that. Liz Rowlinson, how are you today?
Hi Andy, I'm good, thank you. I'm an international property journalist. I've been doing it for 20 years now. Gave up looking after obituaries and recipes on a well-known national newspaper for the glamorous world of property. I went freelance when I started having children, and I've been working for Place in the Sun for 10 years nearly, and love it. And I'm freelance, traveling the world. I go to Spain at least 2 or 3 times every year. Was in Malaga earlier this year, but currently I'm grounded, but enjoying doing lots of webinars and researching the markets from my South London home.
Yeah, your press trip schedule is normally very exotic and glamorous, isn't it? Your wings are well and truly clipped at the moment, I guess.
Yeah, I did 42 flights last year. I've done 6 this year, and I don't expect to do any more. So my passport's packed away.
Right. Kevin, you're actually in Spain. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Yes, I'm here talking to you all from Valencia, or just outside Valencia. All good. We're still on lockdown. Hopefully in 2 weeks' time we'll get a bit more freedom of movement. A little bit of background about myself. I moved to Spain in 2005. Prior to that, I was working in the UK pension industry. 4 years working for a PLC, and then after that 7 years as a pension consultant for Mercer, the global HR and actuarial services business. Set up Mortgage Direct in 2006 with a co-founder, Catherine Walkerdine. We saw that there was a gap in the market for a professional mortgage broker. We didn't really feel that there were any what we would call professional brokers out there at that time. And we came from that background and thought we would set up a business to fill that gap in the market. We started expanding after the global financial crisis, quite a few years afterwards, in fact. So we managed to navigate the business through those turbulent times. We're now a team of 7 brokers and a support team. We are all qualified. We've got the new Spanish credit intermediary exam. All of us passed that in the first attempt in September. I believe we're one of the first companies to pass those exams. So yeah, that's me.
Good, thank you, Kevin. And possibly not so glamorous, North London. How are you, Robin?
Fine, thanks, Andy. Hi, everyone. Yes, glamorous Hertfordshire here. Not much exotic travel for us, I'm afraid, but I'm a director of A Place in the Sun Currency. We are A Place in the Sun's very own currency transfer service. So we exist as an alternative to using your high street bank when it comes to actually sending your money across to Spain or elsewhere to pay for your property. The idea being that we can get you a better exchange rate and a better service than you're likely to get from your bank, and help you through that whole process of getting your money across as efficiently as possible.
Thank you, Robin. Well, we're going to kick off proceedings by finding out the intentions of our audience and how they plan to pay for their property. So let's just ask this first poll to get that sort of feedback from the audience. So how are you planning to pay for your property? Is it part cash, part mortgage, equity release from a UK property, a pension drawdown, or the sale of a UK property? Or are you in the fortunate position of being able to splash the cash? If you want to click on one of those, that will give us a feel for everybody out there and how they're planning to pay for their property. And if we take that down now and have a quick look at the results, we will find that part cash, part mortgage, good for you, Kevin. Equity release from a UK property is 8%, and well, a sale of a UK property 20%, and 33% cash buyers. So the same amount of cash buyers as we have part cash, part mortgage at 33%. So thank you for that, everybody. Liz, if I can start with you, we all get excited about identifying an amount of money to spend on a property. I've got 100,000, 150, 200, whatever it may be. And then we jump on portals, possibly on aplaceinthesun.com, and start looking at properties at that price. What else do you need to factor in, and what do you need to consider as part of that budgeting process?
Well, with Spain, I think it's particularly key to budget for the purchase costs because they're relatively high. We tend to say between 11 and 14%. Depending on the region. The Canaries are the cheapest at 6.5% for stamp duty, going up to 10 sliding scale in the Balearics. But I mean, there's that tax, so you're at least 10% there. And then you must always use a lawyer. We've got lawyer fees, you'll have notary fees, maybe admin costs. So you do really need to budget, you know, a good maybe 15% on top of the sales price.
And legal fees tend to be, it's about 1% in Spain, typically, with a minimum of about 1,500 or so euros.
I believe that's correct. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And Kevin, if, as a third of the audience are looking to do, they're planning to use a mortgage, at least in part, what do people typically come to you for? Are they looking for a UK mortgage or a mortgage with a Spanish bank? Can you just explain in fairly basic terms the products that are available?
Well, we are predominantly, we cover Spain and Portugal. We can offer advice on UK mortgages, but really only if it's tied in with buying a property in Spain or Portugal. So for example, if somebody wanted to release a bit of equity to help cover some of the costs, then we could help with that as well, but it's not our specialist market. So people come to us in order to get advice on Spanish mortgages predominantly and Portuguese mortgages. Many of them come to us wanting to borrow the maximum amount, so it's worth stating at this point what that is. So for I think many of your listeners are probably in the UK. For British resident buyers, 70%, in actual fact 70% is the maximum for all non-residents, so people that aren't fiscal residents here in Spain. But at the moment, last year we had a new mortgage law brought in, and there's a new rule regarding the currency in which people have their earnings. And for GBP, so pound sterling earners, they will have a new legal right, or they have a new legal right now. So after they sign their mortgage, if the pound sterling drops by more than 20% against the euro, they have a legal right now where they can convert that mortgage from a euro mortgage to a GBP mortgage. This is obviously a new and quite a significant risk for lenders. So a number of them have reacted in quite a negative way. So I don't know whether this was what the Bank of Spain intended when they introduced the new law, but what some of the banks are doing now is they're not offering the maximum amount that they would do to a euro earner to somebody that's not earning in euros, which obviously includes GBP earners. So 60% is the maximum for GBP residents, UK residents, with quite a few of the banks. We do actually have a couple of lenders who will lend 70%. So if you want to get the maximum, please come to us. We are working with lenders that will offer that. In terms of other reasons that clients come to us, they want to find out what interest rates are available. Is it a good idea to do a mortgage to buy a property in Spain? We think it is. Mortgage rates are very, very low here, as they are in many other countries. And if you don't have your earnings in euros, it's a good way to hedge the currency risk, which maybe Robin can help us sort of discuss about that. But no, we get approached all the time, clients that want to understand whether a mortgage would be a good thing for them to do.
And would you be able to bundle in any of the purchase costs into that mortgage amount, or is it 60% or 70% just of the purchase value itself, at the property value?
It's just of the purchase price or the valuation if lower. And unfortunately, you can't roll the cost in as you can in the UK.
Okay. And is there a minimum value or a minimum deposit? I've got a question here from Ross Gilligan about a minimum value and a minimum deposit. Okay,
well, most of the banks these days, when you present an application for a very low mortgage amount, naturally they're going to be a little less interested in it, but they will study mortgages for low amounts. Obviously, there are a lot of properties in Spain, very, very cheap properties, probably at prices that are simply unavailable in the UK, and many of our clients are interested in purchasing such properties. So I'm talking here really about maybe a property that's priced at 50,000 euros, for example, where the client might not qualify for 70%. So let's just say it's a 60% mortgage, which would be 30,000. We definitely have lenders that are interested to study those kinds of cases. So we would be more than willing to speak to any clients of A Place in the Sun that are interested in discussing those kind of values.
And typically working as a broker, then you are dealing with multiple banks about multiple potential products.
Yes, very much so. I can remember back in the early days of the global financial crisis. I mean, prior to that, we had a number of, well, many different banks that we could approach for mortgages in the early years of Mortgage Direct. When the global financial crisis hit towards the end of 2007, more or less, within the space of a few months, a lot of those lenders fell away. They weren't interested. I can remember sort of 2008, 9, 10, in the early years of the crisis, that we were down to probably 2 lenders, really as bad as that. With the recovery of the property market here in Spain in recent years, and I'm talking probably from around 2014, 15 onwards, really, more and more lenders have been entering the market, which is great for us. We like to have more lenders to be able to work with. Some of them specialize in lower priced properties. Some of them are at the higher end. Others have sort of products which fit certain client profiles and others not. So for us as a broker, it's really good to have more and more lenders on the scene. And we've been pleasantly surprised since the coronavirus hit sort of a few months ago, that all those lenders are very eager to lend still and receive applications from us.
Liz, we had a webinar on Friday with colleagues in the States who were discussing mortgage availability over there, and they made an interesting point that you might like to pick up on, in that given that the dollar at the moment is pretty strong against the pound, and therefore your pound doesn't go too far, they're actually advising anybody who comes to them to buy to actually take out a mortgage in the States, because therefore if you're buying a £200,000 property, you might only be putting down 50 or 60,000, but then you can pay that mortgage, monthly mortgage, with your income from rental in the States, and therefore you're paying a dollar bill with dollar earnings, so you're not exposed to any fluctuations. That seems to be something quite common that you come across when speaking to buyers.
Yeah, I mean, since the EU vote, and the fluctuating currency, we've seen a lot of buyers taking out mortgages, even if they don't need to, just to reduce their exposure to the currency drops. So some countries, for instance, Portugal, don't really have very high early redemption penalties, so they can actually pay back their mortgage when the pound recovers, maybe a year later, 2 years later, and they've that's a solution to not they don't lose as much money as they might have done in the if they paid cash.
Yeah. So somebody knows who knows all about currency fluctuation is Robin from A Place in the Sun Currency. I mean, obviously you're keen for people to change their pounds to euros or dollars, which they have to do at some point, let's face it. So I guess it's all about advising people how to manage that and how to make their money go further.
Yeah, exactly. I think we've seen more people taking mortgages in euros or dollars recently. There is a risk to that as well, though. As Liz says, it does have to be paid back at some point. And to some extent, you might just be delaying that issue if your earnings are still in pounds and you're still having to pay back a potentially large mortgage. And the pound may not recover, of course. And we've got things coming up, which we'll talk about later, about what may happen in the next year or two. If you've got your earnings in euros, I think it's an obvious and sensible way to do it, because as you've said, you're paying a currency bill with some currency earnings, and therefore there's no exposure. But I would always advise people to talk through their overall exposure to currency fluctuations, depending on where their income is and where their expenditure is, and whether those two are the same currency or not.
And why should people come to you in the first place? I think you've mentioned to me in the past a statistic around how many people still use a high street bank for large currency transfer dealings. Why is that inadvisable in your view?
Well, the main reason is just for the exchange rate that you'll get from your bank. Banks do rely on a lot of latent business, just as they do with their mortgage rates and a lot of their other products. They rely on their customers not shopping around and not realizing that they can get a better deal elsewhere. So the banks have kept their exchange rates fairly uncompetitive over the years. And if you use a specialist broker such as A Place in the Sun Currency, we can always offer you a saving against any exchange rate your bank will give you. And of course, if you're moving a large sum across, a saving of 1 or 2% can quite easily run into thousands of pounds. So it's always worth speaking to an independent broker, as well as getting a much better service than you'll tend to get from a bank clerk who doesn't necessarily have any expertise in that area.
Okay, well, let's just see what our audience instinctively would do and ask the question via the poll. If you were transferring a large sum overseas, would you instinctively use your high street bank? Or would you go to a specialist currency company? We should probably say at this point there are other currency companies out there apart from A Place in the Sun, but Robin does a very good job, as I'm sure the other ones do as well. But what would your instinctive response be if you were moving £100,000 across overseas? Would you use a high street bank or a specialist broker? Yes or no, we want from you on that one. And let's shut that down and take a look at people's approach to that and what they think about using a high street bank or using a currency specialist. Let's close that poll, and well, split 50-50. Well, that 48-52 has got a certain ring to it. If people remember cast their minds back to about 4 years ago, that has certainly got a familiar ring to it, but that seems like ancient history right now. So that's interesting, Robin, that the audience is split about 50-50 there, yeah?
Yes, that's about what I would have guessed at, actually. I think there's still potentially a little bit of reluctance around safety and security, but we are FCA regulated these days in our industry, and that's certainly something I would say anyone using a currency company do check that they're regulated by the FCA and based in the UK, so you can pick up the phone and speak to people if you need to, and you know that you're dealing with a properly regulated company. But it is very safe and secure. There's really no reason not to speak to a currency broker. It's a very well established business in the industry these days.
Okay, thanks for now, Robin. We'll come back to you for some more detail on how that all works later on. Liz, we said in this session as well that we'd cover negotiation and going and how you actually settle on your offer price for a particular property. And there's no fixed answer. The answer is not 5% off the asking price or 10% because it varies by market, obviously. But how do you present yourself as an attractive buyer? What things are going to go in your favour when you walk into an estate agent's office and then put your offer on the table? What are they looking for in a buyer?
Well, I mean, if you're a cash buyer, you're going to be able to proceed very quickly, so that you have the advantage, and somebody might pick, if they have two offers, they might pick a slightly lower offer, even if the buyer can proceed as soon as possible. And I think during this crisis, we're going to see quite a few vendors that are going to be quite keen to sell up and have to move on with their life for different reasons. So I think being a cash buyer has an advantage. Knowing how much you can negotiate is all about doing your research on the property, finding out how long it's been on the market, whether there have been any price reductions, and having a good local estate agent can really help you have some negotiating power and experience behind your stance.
Yeah, and Kevin, if you were going out there and you weren't a cash buyer, what could you do to prepare yourself to put yourself in a better light in front of an agent and a vendor if you have to resort to a mortgage?
That's a good question, because obviously with the coronavirus, the first week of lockdown, we weren't sure what was going to happen with the level of inquiries. We did notice a big drop in the first week, but then pleasantly surprised that from the second week onwards, and really it's been sort of growing and gathering pace ever since, we are sort of getting a lot of clients that want to be well prepared. They want us to have the initial discussion with us to discuss their profiles. Do we think they're eligible for a mortgage? What kind of conditions would they be eligible for? So they really sort of get information, fact finding from us. And we're more than happy to do that. And those that want to take it a step further, actually want to go through the formal process and actually have us apply to lenders on their behalves, we are able to do that. As I said earlier, the lenders here, the banks and other lenders, they're very keen to receive applications. They're still working from home. Underwriters are also working from home. So we've been able to put through all of the pipeline business we had before the outbreak. Most of that's gone through now, and those that haven't gone through are still in the process and will be able to go through. We've got new inquiries coming from people, and they've signed up that have been approved. So the only thing really at the moment is the fact that people can't physically get here to look at the property. There's plenty that they can be doing on the mortgage side of things while they wait for commercial flights to restart.
So you could apply for a mortgage in principle and go through the process with and get an understanding of what likely loan you are going to get ahead of actually even identifying a particular property.
Yes. Going back a few years, approvals in principle, as we would understand what they are in the UK. So in the UK, you would have a binding approval in principle. It's been very difficult to get those in Spain, but there are a couple of lenders now that are willing to provide those assurances, which is really a fantastic thing for us, because all buyers, if they need to have a mortgage, they want that security that they don't jump on a plane, come over here, use up a lot of time from a real estate agent going around visiting properties, and it's all pie in the sky. They don't want that situation. So there's two ways that they can do it. I mean, we're more than happy to talk to clients on the phone. We can go through their profiles. We know all the questions to ask. We're experts at this. If they don't feel confident or comfortable speaking to us on the phone, we're more than happy that they can complete our online form. There's no obligation to start the formal process. We can give them, no obligation advice, let them know what we think they'd be eligible for. Some of them want to have that extra reassurance from a lender, so we can actually do a formal process. Sometimes we can provide just a link on an estate agent's website, provide that to the lender as an example of the type of property that the clients want to buy, and then we can get a formal mortgage approval. And that would be obviously subject to evaluation of the property. We do charge fees for the formal process, which I'll come on to a bit later when we talk about the application process. But yes, there's many things that we can do to help the clients.
Okay, thank you. And Robin, talking about application processes, I guess what's involved in registering with a currency company such as yourselves, and what sort of commitment is there from opening an account with a currency company?
Well, none at all usually, certainly from our point of view. It's very easy to register just on our website, aplaceinthesuncurrency.com. That basically just enables people to have the facility to talk to us, to get quotes, and to agree to buy their currency from us if they'd like to. So the way we try to operate is to enable people to register very easily. We often talk to people for several weeks, if not months, before they actually go ahead and make a purchase. So we'll get to know exactly when they're going, where they're looking, what their budget is, and help them through all that planning process. And once they go abroad, if they find a property they like and want to put a deposit down, we're on hand and we have them all set up and ready so that we can get their currency moving if they'd like us to. So I would always advise to people to get registered nice and early on in the process and be speaking to a currency broker to make that last part when you come to pay for your property as easy as possible.
Okay, and so fairly painless, straightforward process.
Yes, well, we try as much as we can make it so. I mean, obviously there are some regulations in terms of compliance, ID requirements, and money laundering questions, but we do most of that in the background using some technology. So there's very often we don't even need to ask for ID documents even when people register with us. It's very straightforward and simple.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to include a few questions here as we go along. One for you, Kevin. I'm not sure if there is it harder to get a mortgage for a rural property in Spain?
Absolutely. There are two sort of main classifications of land in Spain for properties: rustic and urban. Rustic doesn't necessarily mean it's a real rural property. It's not sort of describing the style of the property, it's the actual land it sits on. So sometimes we have rustic land properties that sit just outside towns, for example, and then you can have properties in the countryside which are actually classified as being on urbanizations and urban land. But properties that are on rustic land, they tend to have a few more problems with planning and so on. So often you have people that have an amount of land and they won't have had the correct planning permission, and they might have built small buildings on the land, or they might have not had full planning permission to build the main building itself. So we do encounter more legal issues with properties on rustic land. As a result of that, lenders have tended over the years to be very cautious, but provided that we can get a valuation, and the valuation is obviously more than the purchase price or at the purchase price, then there's no reason why we can't achieve the same levels of loan to values on rustic land properties as we can on urban land properties. But we do advise clients that if they're considering rustic land properties, that we set quite carefully, that we follow a slightly different process. We advise them not to put down big deposits until they know what legal issues there might be with those properties. So we can in actual fact order valuations before we start going through the formal process for the mortgage.
Okay, thank you. That was a question from Robert Ramsey, so thank you for that. I've got a question here again for you, Kevin, from Angela Bruce. I guess this touches on qualifying criteria. She's saying, I don't have a guaranteed monthly income apart from rental properties, 3 rental properties that I own, totaling about £1,500 a month. I want to take a variable annual amount out of my drawdown pension. Would I be able to get a repayment mortgage, a repayment Spanish mortgage for a holiday property, is the question in short?
Well, it all really depends. Everything in Spain, when a bank is doing what we would call their affordability stress test, they're going to look at the net monthly income for each applicant. So if it's one applicant, obviously that person, or if it's a couple, for example, married couple or a couple, then they would look at both incomes. But also at the same time, they'll look at both sets of debts. So just to give a very sort of basic idea of what the calculation is, so they'll calculate a figure for the net monthly income. Where it's income from rental properties, they don't usually take 100% of that rental income. The reason for that is that it's not fixed income. They don't treat it like a salary, for example. So let's just say, for example, that the rental income on its own was £1,500, they might take, say, 75% of that, or a figure which wouldn't be 100%. And then what they're going to do is multiply it by what we call a debt to income ratio, which is roughly around 1/3. So call it between 30 and 35% of that net monthly income figure. From the resulting figure from that calculation, they'll then deduct the mortgages on those rental properties. If they were mortgage free, so you would have, say, £1,500 multiplied by 75%, whatever that figure is, and then you wouldn't be deducting anything else from that. You'd be multiplying it by, say, 30 or 35%. If that resulting figure, now obviously they have to do a conversion from pounds into euros, so they might do another adjustment there. But if that resulting figure is enough to cover the monthly mortgage repayments in euros, usually that mortgage would be approved. I do find that where clients have only rental income, it's a bit more tricky to get the mortgages through, but we do have some success in getting mortgages through. I think if we had a client where all their income was rental income at £1,500, it would be quite a tricky application, to be honest with you. But I think the best thing to do would be for the client to contact us, and we can go through the figures over the phone, and we'd let her know pretty quickly whether we think there's a chance that she could get a mortgage.
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, it's worth saying to everybody, we will be emailing a copy of this recording with contact details for the panelists, should you want to follow up with any of them. Another one for you, Kevin, you're a popular man today. Diana Cuffey asks, what sort of paperwork do you need, or what documents do I need to start a mortgage application? A fairly basic question, but an important one.
Very important. I think Spain is pretty much in line with all other countries really around the world, more or less, and it's certainly what you call sort of civilized countries anyway. So you are going to need to provide your ID, proof of income, proof of debt, proof that you have the funds to complete the purchase. So I'll just run through those in a bit more detail. So they're going to ask to see your passport. You will need to obtain an NIE number, which is a foreign identification number, to buy a property in Spain. You don't need to have one of those at the start of the application process for the mortgage, but you will need one usually 3 or 4 weeks before you're actually going to buy the property. That then needs to be registered with the tax office. But proof of income, pay slips, P60s, usually going back a couple of years, pay slips between 3 and 6 months worth. I don't normally ask for letters from employers these days. What else would you need? Bank statements, again, between 3 and 6 months worth. They want to see your incomes going into your bank account and also the main outgoings. You would need to provide a credit report from an official credit reference agency. There are many of these all around the world these days. Proof of funds, so they would ask to see a statement from a bank account, or the proof of funds in investments, for example, but just proof that you have the funds for the purchase. Some of our clients are actually using equity release to cover some of the costs that they have on top of the mortgage. That is viable with a couple of the lenders, but in those circumstances, the bank would ask to see what the mortgage repayment would be on that equity release from the new lender. Also, banks will want to see rental contracts. If you're providing proof of rental income, they would want to see annual mortgage statements. So really, the list is pretty comprehensive and pretty detailed, and there's no way around it really. Banks in Spain are very cautious nowadays. Mortgages where you're writing a letter to confirm your income, that's no longer possible here, and you will need to provide a full set of supporting documentation.
And just quickly, if you can, on the period a mortgage can run for and the maximum age one could apply for a Spanish mortgage. We're having a number of questions in from people, including Simon Elliott, about the maximum age that you can be to take out a mortgage, and also could you be a retiree and take out a mortgage?
You can certainly be a retiree, and as in the case with all mortgages, they're going to look at the income. So pension income is accepted as a form of income. They'll want to see your documents from your pension provider, whether it's from the state pension or if it's a private pension, occupational pension. They'll want to see the evidence, so the annual pension statement that you have. The maximum age is age 80. although there's only a couple of lenders who will allow you to take a mortgage up to that age. Many of them, the maximum age is 75, and with a couple of the lenders, even though they will allow you to take the mortgage up to 75, after age 68, they want to see proof of pension income. So, for example, if you were 55 and you wanted a 25-year term, we have lenders that would allow that, or maybe it would be 24 years, for example, full years up to age 80. But they are going to ask to see your proof of pension income, even though at age 55 you might still be employed. They're going to want to see what your future pension income is, so that they know that from age 68, so roughly the retirement age in many countries around Europe, you are going to have sufficient pension income to be able to maintain those repayments on that mortgage.
Okay. Robin, jumping back to currency again, we're all aware that the value of the pound goes up and down against different currencies. How do you go about advising clients who are looking to buy overseas to potentially mitigate that risk?
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have a crystal ball, as we often get asked that, and I wish we did. And the reality is, of course, it's very hard to predict what exchange rates are going to do in the future. All we can really do is tell people what's happening with exchange rates, which way currencies are moving and why. Typically, it hasn't been a massively volatile market until the last couple of years, where we've really seen a huge swing in the value of the pound, particularly against the euro and the dollar, due to Brexit and now COVID and other sort of large-scale events that have really moved rates around a lot. So just for example, in 2019, there was a 14% difference between the best and worst euro exchange rates that were available through that 12-month period. And 14% might not sound like a massive swing, but when you look at the difference of that makes to somebody buying a 150,000 euro property, it's about 16,000 sterling roughly, depending on whether you bought the euros early or late in 2019. Now, a lot of that was driven by Brexit, and obviously worries about a no-deal Brexit. Whether that will rear its head again towards the end of this year is probably quite likely. We're due to potentially have a new trading deal in place with the EU by the end of 2020, and I don't think there are many people who think that's now very likely. Will the government extend that period? That might help. If they stick to their guns and don't extend it, we may see some trouble ahead for the pound. So there are all sorts of variables, and these will all make potentially tens of thousands of pounds worth of difference to the realistic purchase price in sterling of a Spanish property. So while it's very hard to predict, I think it's definitely worth having that sort of conversation around what might happen to exchange rates over the coming months if you're looking at buying. One mistake we do see people make sometimes is just going abroad, putting a deposit down, coming back, waiting until a week before their completion and bringing to buy their currency. And of course, the exchange rate drops in that time, you're stuck with it. Otherwise, you'll lose your deposit that you've already put down. So I would always try and encourage people to look at exchange rates early in the process, talk to a currency broker, be aware of what's happening, and try and keep on top of it rather than leave it in the lap of the gods as to what rate you get. There are a couple of things we can do to help as well. So we can offer fixed exchange rates in advance, which a lot of people use when buying property. So rather than buying your currency and paying for it all months before you need it or at the last minute, if the exchange rate is good when you put the deposit down and you'd like to fix your rate, your budget, sorry, in pounds, you can fix your exchange rates as far as 2 years in advance of your completion, so that you know what you need to find in sterling and you can't be stuck with any nasty surprises. So a number of things we can do to help. The main thing is just to open that conversation early, talk to someone who's been through this thousands of times with other people doing what you're doing, and let us help you manage that risk and your exposure.
I guess with the idea of a forward contract, then you don't lose out if the pound weakens, but nor would you benefit if the pound were to strengthen. Is that right?
That's correct, yes. So if you use a forward contract, which is where you fix your exchange rate in advance, you are committed to that exchange rate. You would pay us a deposit at the beginning of the contract and then the balance at the end. The peace of mind you get from knowing what those numbers are in sterling is something people do value a lot. But you're right, if the rate goes up in the meantime, you won't benefit from that. If the rate goes down in the meantime, you won't lose out. So there's no magic way to guarantee getting the best exchange rate over any period of time. If there was, of course, the currency market would be a very easy thing to speculate on and make a lot of money. So there's no magic answer. It's all about really understanding your budget, understanding what difference your exchange rates can make to that budget, and making sure that you don't fall foul of any nasty surprises and have someone on hand to keep an eye on rates for you.
And just so our audience understands, for transparency, how your business operates, we're getting a number of questions in on, is it a fixed fee that people pay? Do you make a margin on the transfer? How does that operate in the broadest terms?
Yeah, absolutely. So we work in a similar way to a bank, in that a bank will make a margin on any exchange rate they quote you. So if you ring your bank and say, I need to buy 100,000 euros, what's your rate? They'll give you a rate. They might charge you £20 fee to send your euros across to Spain. We do a similar model, quite honestly. It's just that the numbers are a lot smaller. So the exchange rate we quote you will be much nearer to the market rate that you'll see if you just Google the exchange rate online. We'll get you a rate that's much nearer to that rate than your bank will offer you. That's where the saving is. But our rate still includes a margin within it to keep the lights on in the office. Obviously, we don't have thousands of branches to maintain. We don't have dozens of very well-paid directors and millions of shareholders to keep happy. So we can run at a much lower margin than a bank. The margin is in the rate. We don't even charge for transfers to send your money out to Spain or elsewhere. If you're sending over 30,000, and we keep the fee down to just £5 if you're sending a smaller amount. So people do use this for smaller payments, for mortgage payments, for paying their legal fees, for paying their furniture, as well as their big completion property payments. So we can help with all amounts as well.
Liz, you speak to and interview a lot of buyers, prospective buyers who then go on to secure a property. What sort of questions do they ask you, and what sort of advice do you give them about negotiation when it comes to speaking with the agent, or whether they can get extra stuff included? How do you respond? Because it's always something that people want to know, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's a widely different picture if you're buying a rustic property in the middle of nowhere versus a new build property. And I have a couple of questions on new build with mortgages, which I'd love to direct to Kevin in a sec. But if you're looking for if a property's been on the market for 2 years, it's all about finding out the motivation of the seller. And I interviewed a Scottish couple who had a budget for 120,000 euros to buy a home in Andalusia, and it was on at 150 2 years ago. It went down to 99, then it went down to 85, then it went down to 79 in its history of offers. And then they thought, what the hell, we'll put in an offer at 75,000 euros, and they got it because the couple were keen to sell the property. So I think you've got to get your agent to find out as much as possible about the history of the property. And there are going to be a lot of sellers out there who are going to be keen to get rid of their property quite quickly. So find out that. With new build properties, it's a different scenario. The margins are smaller, and I think a lot of agents will suggest that it's tricky to negotiate much on a new build home. But on the subject of, I was going to ask Kevin, you can't get a mortgage, can you, on an off-plan property? Because I know a lot of people are buying new build homes in Spain at the moment.
Yes, I mean, it's because of the time it takes. Usually people pay their deposits a year, 1.5 years, even 2 years in advance, and no lender will guarantee a mortgage for that duration of time. Obviously, I mean, the mortgages here in Spain, when you get a mortgage approval, it lasts for 3 months. Provided nothing dramatic happens, it's relatively straightforward to get that mortgage reapproved. You would just provide the updated bank statements, pay slips, a new credit report, and as I say, if nothing's changed, a bank would want to reapprove it, because once an underwriter approves a mortgage, they want you to sign that mortgage. That's the whole point. They want to lend you that money and start to make money themselves. So it is a risk when somebody's going to buy a new build property and that they come to us and You know, they say, "Oh, can you give me a mortgage approval?" And we say, "Well, we could apply." For example, sometimes we've applied for mortgage approval with a dummy property before there were certain lenders giving approvals in principle just based on a figure. And you know, we say to them, we're very, very clear. You know, we can keep reapplying, but what we'll be able to tell you is, do we think as a broker you would qualify now today for this mortgage? That's the best we can do, really. And then if the client really wants to keep applying every 3 months until the property's ready, we'd be more than happy to do that. But it's probably not worth doing that because they still don't know what would happen in the interim period between each approval and buying the property. So the answer really is no, we can't give or get a mortgage approval for an off-plan property in advance that would be guaranteed for that period.
And Robin, when you buy a new build property with stage payments, using a currency broker is a great way to make sure you know what you're paying at the beginning than at the end, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. If you've got several stage payments to make, you can use several forward contracts to guarantee each stage payment in sterling. Then, particularly if your income and main financial affairs are still in sterling, then that's a nice, comfortable place to be, knowing in good time what you're going to need to find. You can also use a combination. So you might say, well, I want to know what my first couple of payments are going to cost me in sterling, but actually I'd like to keep an eye on the exchange rate, and if it goes up a bit, then I'll fix the next one. And again, that's the sort of thing we can help people work through, and everyone's different and has different circumstances, so there's no definite answer as to what the best way to do it is. But yeah, certainly off plan, a set of forward contracts is a nice way to do it, and have your budget set in pounds. Yes.
I'm reminded here of something that a colleague of ours on these webinars often says, Richard Way, another property journalist that Liz knows as well. He says, you're not trying to beat the market. You're not trying to speculate and make money from this. What you're trying to do is take all the worry and concern about a fluctuating exchange rate around your property purchase. Find an amount that you're comfortable at, a rate that you're comfortable at, and fix it so you then don't have to worry, and that's something that you can then take off the table.
Yeah, I think people often say to us, or we say to them as well, you know, you wouldn't buy a property in the UK if you didn't know how much it was going to cost you. That would seem like a crazy idea to anybody, I think, or put an offer in for this property, but if it goes up or down a bit, that's still fine. But if you buy abroad without fixing your exchange rate, that's exactly what you're doing. And once you sort of think about that a little bit, often you go, well, yeah, of course I want to know the cost in pounds, I'll fix my rate. And then you know where you are and you know what it's costing you.
We should try and answer, I'm not sure there's a specific question here from a Clive Haunt, but he's getting exasperated. He said, the entire discussion is about mortgages. There's only 33% of the people on this call said they wanted to know about mortgages. Can we have some tips for cash buyers, please? Liz, tips for cash buyers other than congratulations and go for it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great time to be sort of shopping for a property now. There's a lot out there. It's a good opportunity to negotiate hard at the moment. I'm not saying that in lots of popular areas you're going to get a great deal, but the chances are perhaps better now than they were at the beginning of the year when market confidence was higher. So do your research, try to find a good agent, get your agent to help you research the property really well, get your lawyer to do thorough checks on it, research as much as you can about the location until you can get out there. That's tricky at the moment, but it's really try and have as much ready to go so that you can hit the ground running as soon as you can get on a plane, hopefully later in the summer.
It's fair to say if you're walking around Spain later on this year with hard cash and looking to buy a property, then you're going to be taken seriously, and you're going to be in a very good position to get a decent deal, I would think.
Sure. I mean, again, it depends if it's an area of Spain that's hit hard. Well, if domestic buyers are love the area as well, you're going to be competing with them, so you might the property market is not in as bad a position as it was after the global financial crisis, because the debt isn't as bad at the moment. So it depends on the location. Again, it comes down to just finding out how much demand there is for a particular property, and how much a vendor is prepared to take a hit or want to move on with their life.
I think you make a good point there, Liz, and we've had a few questions in about the impact of COVID-19 and on property prices, and the truth is nobody knows, whatever they tell you. But an essential difference between now and 2008 is there is not as yet a financial crash. So I think you'd back me up here, Kevin. The banks still want to lend money. People still want to sell houses, and the houses are still being built. So rather than a crash, it's a property market that's just frozen until a period when it will be unfrozen and start again. Obviously, the longer it goes on, there are more risks come into play. But for now, it is a market that's just frozen rather than crashed.
Absolutely. I think there's going to be a lot of pent-up demand once commercial flights restart, whenever that might be. I mean, you read different things every day, and obviously it's a very fluid situation. Different countries are at different stages of their progress, but I think as soon as we can get commercial flights coming back into Spain and Portugal, people will be on them, looking for bargains, looking to make up for lost time effectively. We throughout the whole time we've been in operation here, there's always been a high demand, people wanting to have holiday homes in Spain or move over here and live permanently. The factors that make people want to do that are not going anywhere. Climate, lifestyle, people will always want to come back here. And we were, like I said earlier, very pleasantly surprised by the number of inquiries we're getting at the moment. Many of the clients are willing to start the mortgage process. Some of them think that they're going to bargain, but maybe they won't be as drastic, the property price reductions, as they think they will be. But as you say, nobody really knows what's going to happen to property prices. But we definitely think there's going to be a lot of pent-up demand.
Okay, thank you. We were due to finish at 1:45 and we've gone over, but that's fine. Let's go through till 3 o'clock. I know you've got business at that time, Robin. So there's a whole slew of questions in here from different people. Let's just try and cover them off quickly. Robin, one for you. Do you provide a service where we don't need a Spanish bank account to transfer money? Can we just put currency with you until we're ready to trade it?
Yes and no. So we can send money directly to whoever you need us to send it to. So if you're buying a property, let's say you decided to buy some euros through us before you've actually bought the property, that's fine. We can hold them here awaiting your instruction. We can send then your legal fees to your lawyer. We can send your deposit to your lawyer. We can send your completion amount at a later date. We can send different payments to different places. So we can facilitate all those payments to Spain to different places. We're not regulated to act as a bank, so you can't use us like a Euro bank account. But if you're buying a property, you buy some euros, and we send them to a bunch of different places over a period of time that isn't too long, then that's absolutely fine. Yes. So we tend to find people will only open the Spanish bank account quite late in the process. You need your NIE number that Kevin mentioned. If you're getting a mortgage, you need one of those to open your own bank account in Spain too. Quite often your solicitor will deal with that for you, but that will come around the same time as your completion. So usually we will be sending payments for people to your notaire, your property agent, anyone else you're buying stuff from, and then around the time of your completion, we would then normally fund your Spanish bank account for you, and then that's what you use after that day to day to manage your ongoing expenses. So we can be a bit of a stopgap before you put your Spanish account open.
That question was from Stu. Sorry, go on, Kevin.
Yeah, this might help you get a few more clients, actually, Robin. It's not actually essential to have the NIE number to open a bank account. We can open bank accounts for clients with just their passport. So if they're thinking seriously about buying a property and they want to get some money over into euros before they've got an NIE number, we can definitely arrange a bank account for them.
Okay, that's great. Well,
that's useful to know. Go, Robin.
No, I was just going to say it's a nice way to have your budget sorted out. If you've got your euros bought and in your own Spanish bank account, and you're going around looking at properties with a bank statement showing a nice healthy euro balance, you're in a very strong negotiating position, as well as having dealt with the exchange rate stress already. So that's not a bad way to do it.
A question here from Rachel Doherty for you, Robin. What's the deposit on a fixed forward contract? How much would you typically need to put down?
That would typically be 10% of the sterling amount that we've agreed. We can reduce that for a shorter forward contract. So if you only need to fix a rate for a month, we can probably reduce that down to around 5%. But we need money as a deposit to secure the contract, 5 to 10%.
Okay, thank you. And I don't know if you paid this next person to come on here. It's from Moira Summerfield, who said, we used your currency business and we were very impressed with Ashley.
Excellent. I shall tell him. Thank you very much, Moira, and we'll send you your £5 voucher later on.
Yeah. Liz, Samantha Livingstone asks, are there records of properties in Spain? Are there websites that show the prices of properties as they do on Zoopla, where they've been reduced or first listed? I'm not sure that is the case on Spanish websites, but I don't think it's the case with Rightmove. Rightmove has overseas properties on there. We have a lot of overseas properties, so does Zoopla, but I don't think they show prices when they were first listed or when they were changed. I think it's a case of speaking to the estate agent, isn't it?
Yeah, you're right, Andy. I know you know the Spanish property market quite well, especially statistics, but they unlike the UK and I think America, you can't look at the history of a particular property and its price drops. So yeah, you're right. You have to speak to the agent who's been dealing with the property for sale.
And a question here from Yvonne Taylor. How can you be sure you're employing a good agent? I'm not sure employing is the right term, because ultimately, in most cases, they're working on behalf of the vendor. But what would you look for in the? I know this is not a session particularly about agents, but what would you look for in an agent, Liz, to ensure that you're going to get at least offered decent prices and decent properties?
I mean, I do my due diligence on them. I'd look. I don't think it's always necessarily the thing to do. Look for a big national name. I think there's a lot of brilliant local agents out there who really know their stuff. I think it's difficult at the moment to actually get out and meet people face to face. I think there's a lot of importance about gut reactions to meeting people, trusting them, having a conversation, try and do that on Zoom, and then trying to, getting recommendations from local people helps if anyone can recommend a good local agent. But really look at their website, Google them on the internet, see if there's any bad comments. You can do a lot of research online now.
Thank you. And Kevin, you touched on the requirements around opening a bank account. We are getting a lot of questions about bank accounts and the legal process, which we have covered in a previous session, and we are going to do another session on this in more detail. But can you just briefly take us through the process for opening a bank account and what you would need to have in place to be able to do so? Somebody's asking, do I need a Spanish address to open a Spanish bank account?
No. Obviously, we've been working with these lenders over many years, and I think that where we have an advantage is that we speak to the clients over the phone, and before they complete the property purchase, where they come to Spain, they usually give a lawyer power of attorney, or they will actually be at the signing for that property. So before any real large sums are coming out of the account, the bank will have seen the client, or we will have presented the documents. So we have different things that we can do for the clients. We can do it without the NIE, that's 100% guaranteed. And sometimes the bank will open a bank account and they will have a limited amount of things that they can do with it. So they can move their deposit monies over to Spain. What they wouldn't normally be able to do without physically having seen somebody at the bank is start doing sort of day-to-day transactions. But then some of the banks will actually accept that as well. And we've had a bank say to us that we accept that you've spoken to the client. They're real people. You may not have seen them physically. We'll go along with the fact that these people exist. Obviously, the rules and laws around anti-money laundering and things like that are very strict these days. So banks don't want to be opening bank accounts willy-nilly, just with a few photocopied documents. So it's not that easy, but we can do it for sure, and we do it all the time for our clients.
Okay, well, again, we've got a lot of questions we've not been able to get round to. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, but I hope everybody out there has found it useful today. Please check back at aplaceinthesun.com/webinars. We will be announcing future webinars. We've got plenty more this week and next week already on that schedule, but we're working through plans to continue with more of these webinars because they do seem to be answering a lot of questions for people. So thank you for joining. Thank you for being here. We do appreciate your time. And I certainly appreciate having the knowledge and expertise of my colleagues here today. So thank you, Liz. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Robin. And good afternoon, everyone. See you soon.